This is the walkthrough video for PCTC 2020-21, round 1, question 5, caret counting. So given some information about how big or small a caret can be, and then we're given an unspecified amount of inputs, which is just going to be a series of caret lengths, and to figure out whether our caret length is valid or invalid, and then print off how many are valid and invalid. The very first thing to do with this question is, as always, to look at what inputs we're always going to get. Well, we're always going to get two initial lines, each providing a positive whole number, and those whole numbers represent the day's minimum length and the day's maximum length of caret. So let's first input the minimum length as an integer and do the same for the maximum length like that. Okay, and now we have an unspecified amount of inputs, so we want to keep inputting new caret lengths until whatever number's input is equal to -1. So when we have an unspecified amount of inputs, I like to use a while loop, and an infinite while loop. So to create an infinite while loop, I can just do while 1, and that's because this 1 is actually just true. And you may know that this will be an infinite loop, but I just like to write 1, because I think it makes it a bit more obvious to me that this is an infinite loop. So we're going to keep repeating this loop up until we get the -1. So what's going to be in this loop? Well, every single time we run this loop, we want to input a number, which is going to be our caret length. So let's just call that caret and input the integer. And now before we do the check on the caret, we want to figure out if what was actually inputted is actually -1. Because if it was -1, that means it's not actually a caret, and we want to break out of this loop. So if the thing that was just inputted is equal to -1, then let's break out of this infinite while loop. And that just means that we've finished the program, we've got all the carets we want to get, and we can just exit this loop. But if the thing that was inputted is not -1, that means it was a caret, and therefore we need to do our checks. So we need to check if it is in the valid length range, and if it is, then we mess around with the variables. So we can check if caret is bigger than or equal to the minimum length. Also, if it's smaller than or equal to the maximum length that we inputted right at the start. So if it falls within this range, and we're making sure it's an inclusive range by adding these equal signs, if it falls within this range, then it's a valid caret. So we can add 1 to our valid counter. So let's just create a valid counter at the start of the program, equal to 0, and an invalid counter also equal to 0. These just both start off at nothing. And then as we input our carets, if the caret falls within the specified range, then it's valid caret, so we can add 1 to valid. And if it doesn't fall within this range, then it must be invalid, so we can add 1 to invalid. And this is our loop done. So this segment of code is going to keep repeating for us however many inputs we have, and it's going to quit once we get to a -1. And every time it's just going to check whether a caret is valid, and if it is, we just change our valid count, and if it isn't, we change our invalid count. And so finally, we just need to print off how many valid carets we had and how many invalid carets we had. And if we submit that code, it should hopefully work. Yeah, perfect.